you should be seeing a little dialog box that asks you if you mind this being recorded. So it's a self-select. So please hit OK, or I forget what they ask. So here we go. For more info on our upcoming sessions, and I'll get to that in just a second, please make sure that you are tuned in to our Facebook page. That is SABR Latino on Facebook. Our next session is going to be on Saturday, June 20th, and we are fortunate to have with us Dr. Katz Williams from Marshall University. She is the author of the recent biography on Isabel Lefty Alvarez of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. So we're super excited to have her with us, and she's been really nice to chat with. And I'm really interested in hearing more about what she has to say. That's a subject that's, that's really special to me. I've done a SABR presentation on the Cubanas, the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League a number of years ago. So I'm looking forward to that as well. So again, that's Saturday, June 20th. Look for the announcement coming soon as we finalize a number of things. Very funny, right?
Very funny.
Anyway, so look forward to that. So with us today, let's see, let me get to my little notes here. With us today is Dr. Jorge Iber from Texas Tech University, where he is professor and associate dean in the College of Arts and Sciences. He's got a specialty in the Department of History of Mexican American, Latino American, West, Southwest, and U.S. sports history. He received his PhD from the University of Utah, and his training is in Mexican American history. However, over the past few years, his research has tended to focus on the participation of Latinos in U.S. sports history during the 20th century. And so as I mentioned, he's got associate dean responsibility in the College of Arts and Sciences, especially in the student division. He teaches classes on U.S. sports history, Mexican American history, U.S. Latino history, as well as the general U.S. history surveys. His work has appeared in numerous articles or numerous publications. He's got an article on the overview and early life and career of Topeka's Mike Torres from 1946 to 1978. And that subtitle is Sports as a Means for Studying Latino Life in Kansas. And he's got a number of other works that he can hopefully tell us about in just a little while. So today we're going to be talking about the present and historical perspectives of MLB's Spanish language broadcasters, which we'll be looking to springboard into a future project. And this particular topic is very near and dear to me as well. A family friend is a broadcaster as well, and so he's been a really great friend to me. Jorge, meanwhile, welcome to the SABR Latino Zoom community. We appreciate you being with us.
Anthony, thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here, and it's great to see, a picture of Bill Nolan, but most especially, I am just very pleased to see my old friend Sam Regalado, who is actually the guy who is very responsible for getting me started on this path on Latinos in sport.
That's great. And Sam, hopefully I get you on a Zoom sometime in the future. He's the author of Viva Baseball that came out how many years ago now, Sam?
At least 45, 50, right, Sam?
So let's just jump in. We're getting more folks in, so thank you all for participating. So Jorge, some years ago, Kurt Smith wrote about broadcasters that are commonplace. So his book here, Voices of the Game, kind of the standard in terms of, talking about broadcasters. Guys like Joe Garagiola, Kurt Gowdy, Jack Brickhouse, Harry Carey, Vin Scully, Red Barber. Do you see any parallels with the Spanish broadcasters versus these guys I mentioned in terms of their stories and their career pathways?
Well, I would say there are, because I mean, I think it all boils down to a love of the game and a love of storytelling. And I think really that's why I became a historian, because I love to tell stories and I've always loved sports. So I think, and I've had a chance to talk with Kurt about this on a few occasions over the last few years. Really, one of the things that struck me about Kurt's work, and the most recent work, is where he actually did a little bit of work on Felo Ramirez and Eduardo Ortega. And I think that looking at that work and looking at the significance of the growth of Spanish language baseball. And again, now I go back to Sam Regalado's work on Jaime Jarrin, and the
Mm-hmm.
Dodgers baseball is on the air from the mid 1990s. I mean, I just wondered to myself, you know, if this has become such an important part of Major League Baseball, why is it that there hasn't been a lot more done on these individuals?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Specifically, you know, I would say, you know, Buck Cannell and Felo Ramirez, I mean, Jaime Jarrin, those guys are worthy of, I would argue, biographies. And where are they? Why haven't those been done? So that's really kind of what got me interested in this. And really, the thing that got me started on studying this topic is the fact that Bill Nolan got in touch with me a while back and asked me to do a short piece, about 1,500 words, for the SABR's 50th anniversary book on the San Diego Padres. And the more I dug into the life story of Eduardo Ortega, the more interested I got, and the more connections I saw with the team, the voice, the significance of this to the Spanish-speaking community, both on both sides of the border, in particular to San Diego. So I mean, that's really, I think, what got me interested in working with you and working hopefully with the members of this committee in order to put together this book project.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, and as you mentioned, it's just, you know, it was just a matter of time that such, you know, a project, you know, should come to light, you know, and these guys are pioneers, and no
Yeah.
doubt about it.
Yeah.
And there's a number of years ago, our friend Jesse Sanchez wrote a number of articles for MLB. This is like going back to 2005, called "The Voices of Baseball." And and I'll give you all the link later on. But you know, it really does go through quite a number of Latino broadcasters and really talking a little bit more about their pathways. Matter of fact, I'll put it down in the chat here, and you guys can copy that later. But you know, going back to the broadcasters themselves, Jorge, what makes these Spanish broadcasters so unique?
Well, you know, one of the things that Eduardo talked about, and I mean, I grew up in Miami, and I remember listening to, not, you know, we didn't have the Marlins at that time, but I remember listening to the Miami Dolphin broadcasts in Spanish, because my dad never learned English, so we always listened to the Dolphin broadcast in Spanish. And you know, of course, when you're like 10 or 11 or 12 years old, you really don't understand the significance of this, but to understand the connection between my father's generation and you know, football was known in Cuba, but it was a relatively new game, so to speak. You know, they weren't all that familiar, I don't think, with the NFL, but I mean, they knew about American football. But the fact that this broadcast in Spanish brought us closer to a very important institution in the new city in which we were living, the new city in which we were trying to rebuild our lives after having to leave Cuba. I think that was very significant to a very large number of the people of my parents' generation, the people who were in their 30s and 40s and 50s as we came over to the United States. And that's what I see in this. Now, as far as uniqueness, Eduardo talked about, it's very funny, Eduardo talks about how when he first started, and he was actually broadcasting a spring training game in Arizona. The Padres were playing against the Brewers, and he said that he was using what he called his animated Latino style of calling balls and strikes and telling the story. And of course, there were some fans around him who weren't quite sure what this guy was babbling about in Spanish, and why is he doing this in the way that he is. It really picks up the culture, the flavor, the
Passion.
the passion, the joie de vivre that we have for baseball. And I think that that is part of what you see in the Jaime Jarrin and the Rene Cardenas and the Felo Ramirez and those type of people. And to be able to listen to our sport in our language is really something that makes it possible, gives us a sense of belonging. And I think that that's really one of the key things. Again, Eduardo Ortega, in the article that I did with him, which should be out in the Journal 9 already. You know, heaven knows what's happening with that, given all the stuff that's going on.
Sure.
But you know, that's a very big part of the importance of an Eduardo Ortega.
Right. You know, and that, you know, just what you just said, or just reminding me of, this is what Sam calls in his book, Viva Baseball, that special hunger.
You bet. You bet. And the hunger is not just on the field. And I think really that the whole point of this book would be to make sure that that people understand that the hunger is not just the players who are on the field. It is the hunger for the passion of the sport that we have. And it's coming over the air through our radios. Eduardo grew up listening to Padres games in Tijuana, and they would turn down the volume and listen to the game in Spanish. The same thing would happen in Los Angeles with Jaime and Rene.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That tells you how significant this is, I think.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Well, you know, speaking of the significance, let's talk a bit about those pioneers, Bacanal, Jaime Jarrin, Rene Cardenas, and so on. What do you think were the circumstances that led to their success?
Well, I would argue, and you know, there's a very nice biography of Felo in Spanish. Obviously, you know, I've read Sam's work on Jaime. My own research on Eduardo has, you know, it's the passion of the sport. It is the love of the game, but the uniqueness is the fact that we see it as part of our own culture. It's not so much as if we're participating in American culture. This baseball is ours as well. Mm-hmm. And to be able to listen to the games in our language mm-hmm. is a very heartwarming thing. It really gives us a sense of community. You know, again, I can tell you, thinking back to those days with listening to the Dolphins in Spanish, you know, it gave the people that my dad worked with, who were maybe relatively new to the sport of football, it gave them something to talk. And of course, obviously, you know, I'm talking about the early 1970s. So this was the Don Shula,
right? And, Bob Greasy
had the perfect season and all that other stuff. It gave us something to hold on to in our new city. You know, we still had our own version of Little League Baseball. We had our own version of, you know, some softball leagues, but to be able to listen to the one professional franchise in the city in Spanish was very much of a part of our becoming acclimated to life in the United States. And this, I would argue the same thing is happening with these various broadcasters.
And that's a real interesting question I want to get into later on, especially about kind of the marketing and how Latino broadcasters are used to market or leverage, you know, the Latino players themselves. To mm-hmm. what extent, this is kind of going off script a little bit, but to what extent did this have a kind of an influence on you in terms of like, oh, I wish we had a game or a team I can go see?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
the only thing that I got to watch when I was a kid in Miami was the NBC Game of the Week with Kirk Gowdy. We would get every Sunday Braves away game. We would see that as well. And I think one of the really interesting things here is the fact that I was going through an Americanization process. I came to the United States. Obviously, I spoke no English. I was going into this idea of you're an Americano now, and by golly, you need to speak English. I enjoyed watching these games in English, but at the same time, there's Spanish all around me, and I understood to an extent what it meant for my dad to be able to, and of course, if he would watch NBC Game of the Week with me, or he would watch a Braves game with me, and he really didn't, he didn't understand what they were saying. So I actually would translate for my dad quite a bit, and I think that is really one of the key aspects of all of this. It gives people a sense that we're here, we're consumers. We buy tickets. There are various specific products that, and of course you can get into the debate about, well, a lot of these products are not necessarily products that are beneficial to people, like beer companies and cigarette companies and things like that, and tobacco companies in the olden days. But I mean, just the fact that we're being recognized to the extent that we are consumers and that we are part of the market for the Padres, for the Dodgers, for the Giants, for these various teams, I think that gives people a sense that we're here and we're part of the community, and maybe they ought to try to interact with us a little bit. I think that you can take this thing in a lot of different directions.
For sure.
Outside of what's actually happening on the field. Obviously we love the game. We love to hear the game. We root for the Latino ball players, and we want more Latino ball players on our team. And of course, Fernando Valenzuela is like sort of the quintessential example of the Dodgers being able to take a Mexican athlete and actually really explode that particular aspect of the market. But I mean, you don't have to have 9 Latino players on the field in order for us to be interested. And we are part of the market, and we just want to be recognized for that.
Right, absolutely. And here's a good segue for you. Can you talk to how major league teams might have marketed Latino players and their Spanish language broadcasting? So Fernando Valenzuela and Fernando Mania come to mind. Are there other examples that you can think of?
Well, I can tell you that you had mentioned my work on Mike Torres. Mike Torres was never really marketed as a Latino because, first of all, he played in cities where you really didn't have a whole lot of Latinos. Now, the one exception was Oakland, but I didn't really see anything where he was specifically presented to the Spanish-speaking community in that part of California. And then, of course, he played in Montreal, and he played with the Yankees. But so I think that the fact that Latino ball players were making their mark on the field, and we weren't necessarily getting the recognition. I got to tell you something. One of the most important moments, I think, in my life, and I remember this very, very, very clearly, was when Roberto Clemente accepted the MVP trophy for the 1971 World Series. he actually said something to the effect to the commissioner, I am now going to speak in Spanish to my parents. And
Right.
he asked for la bendición. He asked his parents for la bendición, for a blessing. You know, that really, really meant a lot to me. And again, you know, I was 11 when
Right.
when that happened, so I really didn't quite understand. But for some reason, it's the fact that
Yeah.
here was a Latino ball player speaking in Spanish after winning the MVP to the World Series. That really meant something to me.
Heck yeah.
And part of what I've tried to do in everything that I've done in the last 15, 20 years has been really to focus on what does that athlete whose last name is Clemente Rodriguez Sanchez Perez Torres, whatever the heck it is, what does that person mean? Now, every time that Mike Torres, no matter what team he was playing for, every time that Mike Torres, and he's from Topeka, every time that his team came into Kansas City to play the Royals, there would be a busload of Mexican Americans from the neighborhood where he grew up is actually called Oakland. There would be a busload of Mexican Americans from his barrio who would schlep over to Kansas City to see Mike Torres pitch for whatever team he was pitching for against the Kansas City Royals. Why is that important? Why is that significant? Why did some of the Chicano Mexican American organizations in Topeka have Mike Torres Day? That's the story that I'm trying to tease out of by looking at these athletes and by looking at these broadcasters.
Absolutely, absolutely. Are there examples of some of these broadcasters that intrigue you the most, and if so, why?
Well, you know what, I gotta be honest with you, and I mean, I think, you know, the fact that you know, in this project, you know, I've done Eduardo. That's basic. That article is done. But I've asked you to allow me to do Amaury P. Gonzalez with the Oakland A's and with other teams, and also Orlando Sanchez Diago. I think really obviously part of the attraction is that they're both Cuban. You know, that's obviously part of what I'm interested in.
Sure.
I think that, you know, the struggle that these individuals had to go through in order to come to this country and get to where they are. I like that story. I like those type of stories. I'm so interested in seeing, for example, Orlando Sanchez Diago. He winds up working in Venezuela after the revolution, comes to the attention of Judge Hofheinz with the Colt 45s initially, and then eventually they become the Astros, and how his family has to go through the process of leaving Cuba, going to Venezuela, coming to the United States. What was that like? Really funny story. Judge Hofheinz interviewed Orlando for the position for the Spanish language post with the Colt 45s. And there was some issue with the visa so that Orlando and eventually his whole family could come from Venezuela. And well, you know, Orlando mentioned this to Judge Hofheinz, and Judge Hofheinz, you know, his son, who's also named Orlando, told me the story of, says that the story goes that Judge Hofheinz basically just turned around and picked up the phone and called his very dear friend, Lyndon Johnson, about possibly taking care of this issue. Well, that was such an important moment in Orlando Sanchez Diago's life that his wife was pregnant at the time that they came to the United States, or got pregnant shortly thereafter. And to honor Lyndon Johnson, Orlando, the son, told me that if this child had been born a boy, they would have named him Lyndon. And it was a girl, so they named her Linda, and it's spelled L-Y, as in Lyndon Johnson. So I mean, I just love these stories. I love these stories because, you know, one of the things that I always try to emphasize to my kids in my sports history class is always the struggle, the difficulty, what these people had to overcome in order to get to where they are, be they athletes, or in this case, broadcasters. And I think in a certain way, and this again goes back to some of what my friend Sam Regalado wrote about so many years ago, you know, I would say it is that special hunger. We are driven to get to a certain point and demonstrate our role, our viability, our importance to the broader American society. And I think that's what a lot of these individual stories do demonstrate.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to call on Sam if he could unmute just to talk about you know, Jaime Jarin and, you know, his experience, and especially during the Fernando Mania days. Hi, Sam.
Hey, how's it going, Anthony?
Good, good to see you.
Nice presentation by Jorge.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, you did a great job. I haven't kept up to it. I haven't kept up with it as much as you have, and I think it certainly shows. And plus, he gives me a little bit too much credit. He is an outstanding historian in his own right.
Oh, thank you, Sam. God, that's it's an honor to hear you say that. It really is.
You're very welcome.
I'll send you $20.
I still can't figure out why his hair is still so dark after having been a dean for so long.
It's been a very interesting. I've been there now for 12 years. Yeah, it's been. I was telling Anthony that I actually just had to go in and call about 500 names for our virtual graduation at Texas Tech today.
Oh,
yeah. It was a lot of fun.
So those of you on the call, Sam Regalado is the author of Viva Baseball, Latin Major Leaguers and Their Special Hunger. There you go.
Oh.
And so Sam, you know, I asked you to chat real quick just about Jaime Jarin and his experience during Fernando Mania. You know, his career, you know, we a lot of us know his career and how that took off after a while, and his relationship with Cardenas and so forth. You know, what was it like during the Fernando Mania days?
Well, it was nothing short of fabulous if you were Jaime Jarin. I mean, this is what they had been waiting for. He and the other Spanish, Rene Cardenas, going back to the late 1950s to try to find that person that could be explosive on the baseball scene, so they could run with it. And plus, being in Los Angeles, I mean, it was a perfect setting for all of that. So it's kind of a combination of things that occurred that benefited Jaime Jarin and Rene Cardenas in LA. Fernando was sort of the result of a lot of dynamics that include cable television, for instance, in the 1970s, a greater sense of transnationalism that was occurring at that time. Also, and what I didn't say in Viva Baseball, in retrospect, I probably should have given more credit to Vin Scully, because he commonly, routinely on all these broadcasts would draw attention to Jaime Jarin and the Spanish language broadcasters. There would always be a time in the TV broadcasts of the Dodgers, or even a radio, which he would mention, you know, what great broadcasters they are. You know, if you speak Spanish, tune in to, you know, that kind of stuff, which was part of the marketing thing for the Dodgers too. Yeah, but Jarin, I mean, was kind of the perfect. He was the perfect individual in his time. Here he was, already a notable broadcaster in his own right out of Ecuador, I might add. And by the time we reached the period of the 1970s, all these other dynamics kind of fed in to what he and Rene Cardenas had hoped to get to. And I might add also, just one other brief thing, is that I think the Spanish language broadcasters like them, and there were very few of them at that time, I might add, I think they provided a real model for something called transnationalism, which is something that is commonly touted today through diplomacy and trade relations and these sorts of things. But the reason I say that is because they became a conduit for a lot of their listeners who were bilingual. I mean, yes, they did their broadcast in the Spanish language, but for people like Jorge, for instance, who were growing up in the United States and were translating to their parents and talking baseball, they were speaking baseball in both languages. And as they grew up, they started to get a sense of their own identity, not just simply as people being Americans in the United States, but also those broadcasters also helped them stay in touch with their own Latino identity, as Jorge expressed in his presentation. And so I think that the broadcasters themselves, the Spanish language broadcasters, as they started to emerge in greater numbers, were that model for that transnationalism that we have today. And that's something that I didn't focus so much on at that time that I came out with the first edition of the book, but most certainly is something that I think is pretty important to look at in retrospect. And a lot of the Latino ball players, I might add, responded to that. I mean, these broadcasters, what they did was they expressed the Latino sensitivities in many respects.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, as you talk about that, Sam, and I'm listening to you, Jorge, as well, it's such an opportunity missed, back then, back in the 60s and 70s, that there weren't, as many Latino broadcasters in the clubhouses talking to the Latino players. Go ahead, Jorge.
And you know what? It's some of the other work that I've done. I actually just published a book called Latinos in American Football. Came out a few months ago, and one of the things that I think is so critical in seeing the expansion of the Spanish language broadcasts is that it is demonstrating to the rest of the country that we Latinos are not just in California, Florida, New York, and Texas. One of the things that I found very interesting in doing that book on football is the fact that you have, in certain parts of Arkansas, you have high school football teams. If you go down the roster, 35–40% of the players are Latinos, mostly Mexicanos, Mexican Americans, Guatemalans, Salvadorans. Okay, but so we're moving into these different pockets of the United States where maybe people don't realize yet that we're there, and the fact that you have teams like the Milwaukee Brewers, for example, and the St. Louis Cardinals have now just started broadcasting. In that football book, we talk about the Arkansas Razorbacks. Think about it, SEC teams. Now you would think, okay, maybe the Florida Gators, okay, yeah, that would make some sense. But the Arkansas Razorbacks were broadcasting in Spanish for a period of time. I don't remember if they're still doing that. You have incidents in places like South Carolina where football teams are coming into a certain town and people are actually sort of saying, who the heck are you? Derogatory terms for Latinos, go back to where you came from. Those incidents are taking place in South Carolina. There are something like 60 some soccer teams Latino soccer teams playing in various leagues in different parts of Alabama, for crying out loud. So we are here, we're everywhere, and this is just simply an example of us Latinos at the highest levels. And we are an important market, and we are important, obviously, on the field, and we're becoming more important in the front office.
Absolutely.
That's
And what,
simply part of the demographic changes that are taking place in this country.
and it's been a real incredible shift as well. I've seen, some activity, especially in the Triangle in North Carolina, in South Bend, Indiana, Orem, Utah, and other places where teams, minor league teams, major league teams, and as you mentioned before, they're increasing the number of Latinos in their front office. They're creating more public relations geared at the Latino community.
Yep.
And as a byproduct, some of these clubs are also increasing the number of broadcasting in their baseball booths as well. So I think that's going to be really incredible. And I think, as the 2020 census becomes history, we're going to see a lot more of that. At this point now, we've got half or so of our major league teams that have Latino broadcasters or Spanish language broadcasters. I suspect we'll see a lot more, especially as teams look to market to the Latino community, which, as we mentioned, is growing higher and higher and higher.
Well, Anthony, if I may, let me just throw this out here for you.
Yes, sir.
This was from this is the information that I had when I did the piece on Eduardo Ortega. Teams which broadcast, so this is like 2018, 2019. Teams which broadcast in Spanish are as follows: American League, Boston, Chicago, Houston, LA, Minnesota, New York, Oakland, Seattle, Tampa Bay, and Texas. National League, Arizona, Chicago, Colorado, LA, Miami, Milwaukee, New York, Philly, St. Louis, San Diego, and San Francisco. Now, again, going back to some of the points that I made earlier, some of those teams, holy cow, how can you not broadcast in Spanish in Los Angeles? How can you not broadcast in Spanish in Miami or San Diego but think about it: Milwaukee, Philadelphia, St. Louis. I mean, obviously there has to be a there in order for these teams to expend the financial the expenses that they have to pay out in order to be able to put on these broadcasts in Spanish. Therefore, we are in those communities. How is that sort of presenting to the rest of the country that we're here and that we're part of the United States and that we're part of the country and that we're part of the fan base?
Well, the other part of that too is just really convincing the market themselves. That is, convincing baseball's marketing departments that the Latino audience is worth going after, because you can't have a Spanish language broadcast without sponsors, without the advertisers that are paying for that airtime. Exactly. And then those sales folks going out into the community to sell the products. And then you got a guy, and Bill Nowlin, you might recall Bill Akulik, who runs the Spanish Baseball Network, and he's got a number of teams, contracts with a number of teams to do broadcasting with the Red Sox, and I think the Phillies, and a couple of other folks, I forget who, maybe the White Sox. But at any rate, it's also kind of this network sort of mentality as well. You just sort of expand, you create this kind of conglomerate of sorts, and just try to create more momentum. So that's just one example.
I had a
Go ahead,
chance to meet Bill up in, I think I interviewed Bill in the late 1990s, like 1999, when he was in Boston here putting together the Red Sox Hispanic Radio Network. It's been great that you and Jorge had started this project, maybe more Jorge, on broadcasters, because I've enjoyed speaking to Uri Behringer and all the people that he got to know. And I got about 10,000 words already. I'll have to work on that, but we'll see. But yeah, I mean, Bill's down in Philadelphia now full time.
Okay. Well, so Bill, what have you learned so far about Uri?
Well, that's a long story. I mean, he's from Panama. He came to the United States when he was 2 years old with cancer. He had
Hold on a second. And folks, Bill is talking about Uri Bellinger, and he is the broadcaster, one of the broadcasters for the Boston Red Sox.
he
Go ahead,
is
Bill.
yeah he's these days he's the primary broadcaster
Okay.
for the Red Sox Spanish language broadcaster.
He was
He
just a
started
kid when
when
I
he was
first met him.
19. He became a
Yeah.
professional full-time broadcaster with the Red Sox when he was 19. And he had been in the booth since he was 13. Joe Castiglione, who's the voice of the Red Sox in English, more or less adopted him because Joe was a principal with the Jimmy Fund, pediatric cancer research in the Boston area. And he met Uri, whose uncle is Juan Berenguer. And they made a connection, and Joe invited them up to the booth, and he got up to the booth, and then he got to meet some of the other, couple of the other broadcasters. Bobby Serrano and Hector Martinez were the two broadcasters at that time. And he just stayed in the booth ever since.
Absolutely. And I first met him when I was in Boston, in the booth itself, working on the project, the Fenway project.
2002.
So I got to spend, so I got 1992?
2002.
2002. So time flies. So that was great to be in that booth and meet those guys and hear a little bit more about their stories. So Bill, thank you for that work. 10,000 words.
Sure.
That's great.
Yeah, that's very impressive. That's very impressive.
And over the years, I've actually had the opportunity to meet some of these other broadcasters as well. Beto Villa is one, the voice of the New York Yankees at the time. He's got this, really super nice guy, really rich voice. I wish I could do his voice. It's just kind of Barry White-esque. And but it's just really just nice to see, places like the Bronx just being able to, promote the Yankees in Spanish and so forth. Jorge, so let's talk a little bit about the project. What are you looking for?
Well, what we're looking for all of you folks, Anthony and I are the co-editors of a project on Latino broadcasters. Anthony has the spreadsheet of the individuals that we have picked out. And how did we pick these folks out? Well, obviously there's some legends. Obviously Felo Ramirez has to be done, Jaime Jarrin has to be done, Rene Cardenas has to be done. But I mean, there are other individuals who are, have been around for a while. Tito Fuentes, the great former ball player with the Giants and other teams, has been broadcasting for 15 years. Let's see, Luis Mayoral with the Rangers has been with the Rangers for about 20 years. Eduardo Ornelas has been with the Rangers for 20 seasons. Individuals like that. We're looking for people to contribute articles of about 5,000 words, somewhere in that. Right, Anthony? Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
About 5,000 words. And we're looking for examples of how the stories of how these individuals came to their positions. I've got a copy of my article here from 9. I'm happy to pass that along to whomever's interested if you want to take a look at.
So Jorge, let me just interrupt real quick. I'm sorry. So right now what you're seeing on the screen, I think you're hopefully seeing, is this Excel spreadsheet. So basically the point here is this is, some of the folks that we're looking at, the broadcaster's name, the team, the years with the team, and who's the contributor and so forth. So you see Bill in column D as the contributor for Uri, and we're just going down. So like we say, we're going to be, populating, these cells, hopefully with some names here and some names of folks also in the committee, hopefully, and also in the broadcasters committee as well. So it's a nice way to cross-promote the project as well. So I'm just slowly scrolling over here as you start seeing folks. One thing you might want to do if you're interested in participating is look at the link that I sent you on MLB's The Voices of Baseball. take a look at that. I think that's a pretty good springboard. Again, that was written by Jesse Sanchez back in 2005. And like I said, it just, gives you a nice little springboard. And so you see my contribution is going to be Alex Rivera. So I'll be reaching out to the Seattle Mariners, to their PR department to get in touch with Alex and start that relationship there.
And I mean, the good thing for potential contributors is the fact that, and I've been in touch with Amaury P. Gonzalez quite a bit over the last month or two, and these guys aren't working yet. So, that, now might be a good time to try to reach out to these individuals and see if you can interview them possibly before the start of the season.
And I'll share this list out as well with folks here.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully folks are feeling inspired. You want to contribute your words in helping us create this project. Jorge, let me just take us a little step back for just a moment.
Sure.
Sam, you had a point about Harin and the English language press you wanted to jump in on?
Very briefly, during the height of Fernando Mania, Jaime Harin, in an odd sort of way, kind of exposed the indifference of the English language press when it came down to the Latino ball players, something that Clemente had been complaining about for years.
Yeah.
And I was curious when I spoke to Harin, I said, why? How come you guys actually needed to translate? Because I mean, this is Los Angeles. They would always have these press conferences right after Fernando won a game, and all these journalists had to go through Jaime Harin. Well, as it turned out, the LA Times didn't have one single sports journalist that was bilingual. I mean, that was the biggest newspaper in LA that covered the Dodgers. And yet a month into Fernando Mania, and they still had not a single bilingual journalist covering Fernando. So that's why they had to go through Jaime Harin.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Well, the indifference, and going back to some of the stuff that Eduardo told me about, the way that the names, and it's very, I'm really conscious about this, because one of the things that I really, really try to do when I'm doing the names of our graduates in the College of Arts and Sciences at Texas Tech is, we have a lot of African students, we have a lot of Thai students, we have a lot of Arabic students. And, I really purposely work at making sure that those students' names are pronounced properly. And Eduardo talked about the sense that initially, as these Latin ball players were coming up, there really wasn't much concern about being able to properly pronounce their name. And properly pronounce the name, if you're going to mention the name of their hometown, you didn't really bother with learning, boy, that's a really strange name. Guayaquil, where the heck is that? So those are the things that really, I think, stand out at that Fernando Mania and some of these other more legendary moments and individuals. These guys have made it possible so that now English language broadcasters will go to an Eduardo Ortega and say to him, how do I pronounce this? And I think that's only a matter of being respectful. I've been stopped, okay, of course, today's graduation was virtual, so this didn't happen, but I have been stopped on more than one occasion over the last 12 years that I've been doing this by Mexican-American or other Spanish-speaking Hispanic, Latino parents. Thank you very much for pronouncing my son or my daughter's name properly, for rolling those R's the way that it should be, knowing that our last name has an ñ instead of an N. We appreciate that. And that's what this is at the major league level.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In as much as, this recent campaign called Pone Acento.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is, if those of you have not heard about it, it is this project that calls for teams to include the accent or the ñes and so forth on the player names on the back of the jersey. I've been trying to extend that particular subject to the local Seattle Times to ensure that they're including the accents or the ñes. Haven't made much progress, but you know, these things take time. Anyway, so we've got 5 minutes left. Let me jump. Anybody please unmute if you've got a question that you'd like to ask. Certainly want to feel free to get some questions answered. Let's see, Jason, let's see, what's 71? Oh yeah, absolutely. So Jason's talking about, go ahead, Jason, just feel free to.
No, first off, I want to say thank you to Anthony, to Jorge, to Sam for all doing this. This is amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, as someone, I'm just kind of coming up myself in sportscasting and learning the industry and whatnot. But I always think about, I mean, like growing up, John Miller, I mean, he does say like, adios pelota. And even that, like, it's a very subtle homage. But as someone who, you know, my parents are speaking at home and stuff, I always kind of was drawn toward that. But I was curious, like I was just watching the 71 Game 7. And when they toss, you know, to Roberto Clemente and they, you know, he says, I want to say something to my mother and father in Spanish. Please, can I say something? He kind of, you know, the American broadcasters like address him as Bobby.
Yeah.
They're very like, they seem, although that moment meant so much to Latinos, it felt like the people broadcasting it themselves weren't too happy about that happening. So I was curious, as you studied this, like, did you come across kind of the American broadcasters' hesitance or reluctance to open the floor or give players like Roberto that platform?
Well, I would argue that Sam would be a good person to respond to that because he's done quite a bit of research on Clemente. But I would argue, you know, that they didn't see this coming. They had no clue that he was going to do this. I'm again, Sam, correct me if I'm off base here, but I just think that this is not something that they expected to see happen. You know, the player would thank God, would thank his wife, would thank his family, but it would be done in English. And the fact that you have a player of the stature of Roberto Clemente doing this very, you know, and again, Sam, you could, you know, you might want to chime in on this, and Anthony too. But you know, I remember my mom giving me la bendición, you know, giving me a blessing as I was walking out the door to go to school when I was like, you know, 9 or 10 years old. That really meant something to me. I just think that these folks probably didn't know what hit them. Sam, is that kind of maybe because I mean, Clemente was a guy who was abused by the media. Oh, totally. And he wasn't the only one, but he was abused by the media. Sam, why don't you sort of like maybe touch on that?
I think he covered it really well. I'm only surprised, and I do remember when he did that, and it was kind of a stunning moment. Yeah. I'm just surprised that, in retrospect, he didn't tell the broadcasters or tell the country, and he said, quit calling me Bobby Clemente.
Yeah,
because that was all that kind of stuff was really common on baseball cards.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Yeah, so people came to accept that as this was their names.
Yeah.
Hey, Sam, back to you for a second. Our old friend Stu Shea has a question, just really about the falling out between Jaime and Rene Cardenas. You know, both were such legends, and it's sad that they had this falling out.
Well, in the interest of time, it was Rene Cardenas never felt that he was getting his just due. In fact, he was the one that actually initiated the Spanish language broadcast.
Correct.
He was expecting to be the broadcaster, and he went on to the Houston Astros after that. But yeah, there was a falling out in large part due to the sensitivities that he wasn't getting the kind of credit that he deserved, and it sort of played itself out sometimes in the broadcasting booth. It was unfortunate.
And you know, in part of my research for the Orlando Sanchez-Thiago piece that I'm doing, I had the opportunity to interview Rene, and it was It was subtle, but
Mm-hmm.
it's there. Yeah, it's there.
Right, right. Especially when Jaime was elected to the Hall of Fame, the Ford Frixie Award.
Right.
Well, look, I would argue, and Sam and Bill, any of you guys might want to agree or disagree with me, but I think Rene deserves to be in the Hall of Fame as well. But he certainly does. I don't want to say it's a grudge, but he certainly does feel that Jaime has gotten the better of this.
Yeah, no, Rene was a true pioneer. There's no question about that.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. All right, listen, we've reached our 2 o'clock time, or 2 o'clock Pacific, that is. And I want to just close this out and respect all your times. Folks, I really appreciate you all being here, joining us for this really great session. It's been recorded, so we'll get that posted as soon as possible. Jorge, thank you so much. Really appreciate your contributions.
Hey, listen, if I may just say one last thing. If anyone wants to get in touch with me, please contact me at Texas Tech. It's jorge.iber@ttu.edu. I'm happy to continue the conversation. Sam, you need to get back in touch with me, man. It's been too long.
He's retiring soon, Jorge.
No, aren't you retired, Sam?
I am retired. I'm in a phase out retirement program. But I'm technically retired.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Sam, thank you very much. Really appreciate your contributions here. Bill, thank you very much. Really appreciate you being here and all your work here. Everyone here, again, really thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. And again, we will look forward to seeing you again on June 20th for our discussion with Dr. Kat Williams, Professor of History at Marshall University, who will be talking about her recent biography on Isabel Leti Alvarez, the Cubana of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. So until then, you all stay safe, wear your masks, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you very much.
All right, everybody, take care. Enjoy your weekends.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.